We are checking in on the Toronto Maple Leafs with a look back at last season, an off season with a lot to talk about, and of course, looking ahead to the upcoming season, all that and more on this edition of Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before. Only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
Hey, hockey fans, welcome to Locked On NHL Game Night, your place to get a recap of the night in the NHL during the regular season and the playoffs. But obviously, we're in the off season, and that means we are reviewing all 32 NHL teams to get you ready for the upcoming season. I'm Eddie Garcia, and when I'm not co-hosting Locked On NHL Game Night, I am the host of Locked On LA Kings.
And I am Shukri Wright. When I'm not co-hosting Locked On NHL Game Night, I am also the co-host of Locked On MLB Game Night and a host and producer for 97.5 The Fanatic. In the latest headlines we bring you during the NHL offseason, as we are going north of the border, this time we're going to Canada's largest market, Toronto, and what has been already an eventful offseason, and look ahead to the upcoming season.
And we are happy to welcome in one of the hosts of Locked On Toronto Maple Leafs. It is David Morassutti. David, so many things to talk about with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and looking forward to talking about this offseason and looking ahead. But I'm sorry, we do have to start by looking back to last season. 32, 36, and 14 was the record for 78 points. Last in the Atlantic Division. I guess the obvious question, David, is how do you go from division champs one year, 108 points, to last in the division a season ago?
So first thing I got to do is I got to reverse the effects of the neuralizer that I gave myself at the end of that season. Because it has been 10 years since the Leafs had a season that bad.
Jeez.
10 years since the Leafs have had a season that bad. And you know what? You mentioned it. First time they went in an Atlantic Division, right? All those things. But even then, there was something amiss from that time a couple of years ago that finally blew up in their face last year. They relied, I think a couple of years ago, they relied too much on goaltending being so hot that it apparently wasn't reliable enough. It wasn't something they were going to be able to sustain. Injuries did take a toll. I think the direction that they went with Craig Berube clearly was not the right direction. You know, you have a team that's mainly skilled players trying to play a more grinded style that just didn't work. They were not really good at defending. They weren't very good at sustaining pressure in the offensive zone. Like, there were so many things that were happening because this was a team that was going to be playing responsible hockey. They were playing very irresponsible hockey last year. Like that, I hadn't seen them play this poorly in 10 years. And 10 years ago, they were actively trying to tank. I call it the ethical tank, where they were just, it's not that they had good players and just told to play bad. That time, they had a very brutal roster that was playing as well as could have been. This time around, you had a roster that, as you said, was part of a division-winning season. And so I just think, the style just didn't work. You had teams in the Atlantic Division that weren't taking that step. The Sabres, the Canadians were, a couple of years ago, a wild card team. They became, more present in the division. The Senators had a better season. They had their ups and downs. And Tampa, again, had a really good year. So it was kind of a lot of things that went against the Leafs. The Atlantic Division is, I think, a big part of it. They were terrible against the Atlantic Division last year. When you're not good against your division, you're likely not going to have a good season. And there were moments where they thought maybe things were going to turn around, but there were just too many things going against them. Too many of the top-end players, you could tell, it just wasn't working. William Nylander was not performing as he had been injuries. This guy was one of the more durable players on this team, and he even had his times where he couldn't play and had to take some games off, which you never see William Nylander do. Like 65 games is actually like the last time that happened was, I believe, when he was negotiating a new contract. That was the only time he ever had like fewer games played. Auston Matthews, their top player, was, and as we know, just not the same. Injuries, goal scoring went down. His usage was more as like an Alexander Barkov, where he's asked to play two-way more than counting on his offensive ability. So when they weren't scoring, it was becoming very apparent that they were going to be taking that step back. Too many things that were creeping away from what was working as a good regular season team under Sheldon Keefe, and they're trying too hard to be a playoff team during the regular season. Like, yes, you have to have that identity going into the playoffs, but you got to get there. And I just think that the direction they went was not the right direction.
It wasn't all bad for the Maple Leafs last season, but one thing that did stood out to me was, watching Easton Cowan, who was a rookie last season, playing his first full year. Despite the fact that he played in just 66 games this past season, I don't know if you want to blame Craig Berube directly or not. That's a question in its own right. But I thought that he did show potential as being as a legitimate top six forward on this team in Easton Cowan. So what were your impressions of watching Easton Cowan this past season? And two, do you blame Craig Berube for the fact that he only just played 66 games, despite the fact that he was that he was challenged by Craig Berube while he was head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs?
Yeah, I have no problem with a younger player being, challenged by a coach to earn his play. They earn his ice time. No problem with that. But the last thing, I constantly harped on this last year. You can't sit a guy who is 20 years old trying to make his way, as this is still development years for him, crucial development years. It's like you either play him or you put him in the minors. He should never be in the press box. And it was such poor roster management that even when they wanted to send him down, there was a clause that because he had been up in the league for too long that he couldn't go down. Like there was a whole roster management thing. I'm just like who's thinking? Like it was almost like it was a secondary. He was like a secondary player. It's like this guy's a first round pick. The Leafs have not had many first round picks. This is a first round pick, and you're kind of putting him, in different, like up and down the lineup, scratching him, having guys play that I frankly should never have been playing in the NHL. Like I look like a guy like Calle Yarncroc. That guy should never have been getting ice time over Easton Cowan. So this was my issue where Craig Berube was coaching for his job a lot of the times. Coaches who are coaching for the job are not going to trust younger players until it's too late, right? And that's eventually what happened, right? Is eventually he started giving him the more prime time minutes, which was nice to see. And then, I also covered the AHL run for the Marlies, and Easton Cowan was a big part of that. He wasn't their best player because, he was, trying to get used to playing professional playoff hockey. That was a crucial thing for him because he wasn't getting that with the Leafs. So I was very impressed with what I saw from him. Hard worker. He puts in the effort. Offensively, there's still a little bit of work to do for him to become that everyday top six player. He did show good things when he was up with the Leafs, and I think he showed more desire to own the puck when he was down with the Marlies. They trusted him with that. They wanted him to do that. So a lot of good things from him, but Craig Berube did not do him many favors.
We are just scratching the surface here with David Morassutti, the host of Locked On Toronto Maple Leafs. We're going to get into some major issues going into this offseason and a lot of different changes. We'll do that next here on Locked On NHL Game Night. Locked On NHL Game Night is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's hitting a homer today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play. Just make a free pick on who you think will hit a home run in their game. And if you're right, you'll receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the Major League Baseball season. Daily Dingers is just another fun way to stay engaged with every day's games, whether you're following your favorite team or keeping an eye on matchups across the league. Every game has someone capable of going deep, and now you get a chance to make your prediction before the first pitch. Sometimes it's a hitter who's on a hot streak, maybe a favorable pitching matchup or a ballpark that gives up a lot of homers. Those are some of the things I look at before I make my Daily Dingers pick. So are you ready to play your game today? Join all the action at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play Daily Dingers and make your free pick on who is hitting a homer. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, we're back with David Morassutti, one of the co-hosts of Locked On Toronto Maple Leafs. David, obviously a lot of changes, but I did want to kind of squeeze this in as something that happened last year that is related to perhaps some of the offseason changes. The biggest incident with the Maple Leafs last year was, of course, the Auston Matthews collision with Radko Gudas and his teammates not stepping up to defend him. Do you think, clearly, when you go from first to worst, there's going to be changes. Do you think that incident made more changes? It was obviously magnified, but did that incident help to have there be more changes with a coach and a GM, or do you think that happens regardless?
I think it happens regardless, because I think the way they're playing was just not going in the direction they wanted it to. Keith Pelley, the president of MLSC, kind of made it clear that there was a lack of alignment, right, of what needed to be done with the Leafs. But I do think that Auston Matthews incident really highlighted the culture issue. I hate saying those things. It's like a buzzy thing that people want to say, but it just spoke to things had gotten so rotten that you could tell when you don't step up for let alone star player, your captain goes down and nobody steps in for him. Something has to be done. And, I do know that, Brad Treliving, he had to call, the team was going on a road trip and he had to call a bunch of players, gave them, the grief about not doing that. But to me, Brad Treliving had a vision of what the Leafs were supposed to be, and it didn't execute properly. So I do think that was the catalyst for, okay, changes were going to be needed. There was no way the Leafs were going to let things stay the same, especially with Auston Matthews. Like, that's an incident there where if I'm Auston Matthews, I'm telling manager or someone, this can't continue. Like, this is just, it's not a winning environment.
When you talk about, some of the moves that the Maple Leafs have made thus far, Darren Raddysh is the big one, because Darren Raddysh, when I think back to last season, he didn't get off to the strongest of starts. It's easy to forget that Raddysh was actually a healthy scratch in 6 of the Lightning's first 13 games last season. And after that point on, he just basically took off. And now him being a member of the Toronto Maple Leafs, I find it interesting in regards to how well he fits with the blue and white in Toronto. So my question to you is your thoughts on Darren Raddysh becoming a member of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and also how do you see him fitting into this lineup as part of what the Maple Leafs are trying to do this upcoming season?
Yeah, I think, again, this was a move where the Leafs were clearly lacking offense from the blue line. Morgan Rielly had shown that he can put up points, but he doesn't have those same offensive instincts that Darren Raddysh has. The power play in Toronto had been god-awful and too predictable. Like, the play was feed the puck to Matthews, feed the puck to William Nylander. Well, when you have nobody from the point willing to actually shoot, that makes you it makes you so predictable, easy to defend, and that's what was happening with the Leafs. But Darren Raddysh, to me, I thought all about his offense, right? His ability to have one of the hardest shots recorded last season, put up a lot of goals, was really good on the power play. But what really did it for me was when Victor Hedman wasn't playing for the Lightning last year.
Yep.
Who was the one that stepped up and ate a lot of the minutes? Really
Raddysh.
stepped up his role. That was Darren Raddysh.
Yep.
Now, is he that clear-cut number one defenseman that the Leafs have sorely needed for so many years? I'm not in that. I don't think he is. I think he is so much better than some of the acquisitions they have brought in recently for that blue line, and the cost risk to get him. You gave a nothing pick, really. You didn't really have to give him much draft capital to get him ahead of the free agency class. Because I'm sorry, if Darren Raddysh got to the open market, some other team is making a ridiculous offer to him. Mm-hmm. So I just think it was such a savvy move for the Leafs to get in there early and to trade from inside before he got the free agency, because that was the number one thing they needed. Their blue line needed to be addressed. They did other moves to address it, but he was the cherry. Like, he was the main course of that. And when you bring in like the Tanevs, the Oliver Ekman-Larssons, they tried Brandon Carlo, that didn't really work, but they brought in Emil Andre. Actually, Andre was was a Chayka move. But when you look at some of the moves done in the past, good stay-at-home veteran defensemen, they need to get something different. They need to change the mix on the blue line a bit, and Raddysh, I think, was a really good start when they started all this.
Well, you mentioned his last name, and the man who made the Darren Raddysh move is GM John Chayka. Certainly, you cannot accuse the Leafs of not thinking a bit outside the box with that hire. What did you think of the hire when it happened? And now that you've seen him do some work, how do you feel about it now?
Yeah, we were very much like, they're really doing this, huh? They're really going with John Chayka. And I'm sorry, you could not have asked for a worse introductory press conference for an executive than the one that he had. That was a train wreck. I don't blame John Chayka. It wasn't his fault. The Leafs were not prepared for the storm that was coming in that press conference. And it's funny, when you have Toronto is so infamous that press conferences get talked about more than I think any other team in the league. But then you started seeing the moves. A couple of the first moves, bit of eyebrow raisers. Like, he trades Joseph Woll and Simon Benoit to the Flyers for Emil Andre. They get a goalie that they were never going to keep and a pick. And it's just like, it seems light for a goalie that a lot of people liked. A lot of people in the organization thought had a bright future. But then you started to see the vision a little bit more. He was trying to look at the areas that just weren't up to par. Goaltending wasn't good enough. They didn't have reliable goaltending. So what does he do? He goes and he gets Sergei Bobrovsky. And I was like, oh, they went with an old goaltender? Yeah, but an old goaltender that can go over 50 games in a year. That's like, the Leafs haven't had that really since Frederik Andersen a few years ago. The Freddie that had kind of just started getting into his injury prone stage. Like, he was a goalie that used to be very durable. So they went and they did that. And then you start to see some of the other moves, essentially reversing a lot of what Brad Treliving had done, making this team more analytically sound. And then obviously the coaching change was another one for that, right? To bring in Jim Hiller, if you had told me at the end of the offseason, after Brad Treliving and Craig Berube were fired, that John Chayka and Jim Hiller were going to be the ones to take over, no way would I thought that. And there was a lot of hoopla about all that and what direction are they possibly going in. This is going to be such a disaster. Within the first few weeks of him taking over, John Chayka taking over, that opinion has really swayed. A lot of people have seen the vision, because he's not just making changes on the ice, off the ice too. A lot of scouts, a lot of personnel people. The Leafs at one point had like 6 assistant general managers. They don't have 6 anymore. He has really made this front office his vision, obviously, but he went out and he changed a lot of the Brendan Shanahan parts. And to me, that was crucial, because I said that if you're going to do something new, you couldn't keep a lot of what Brendan Shanahan had brought in, because then you're just kind of keeping things a little status quo because that mindset from the past regime would still be there. This is all new. We didn't even talk about yet Matt Sundin coming into the fold. Now, what does Matt Sundin really have to do? He's kind of more of a senior advisor role. But if there's anybody who knows the ups and downs of being in this market, it's Matt Sundin. He has seen what playoff success. Yes, I know he never won a Stanley Cup, but he's gone further than anybody else in that organization to a cup final. He knows current trends with the league as well because he's been, doing some analyst work with the Swedish team for the Olympics. He's very well connected. And he's willing to, this team is willing to do things differently. They brought in Daniel Alfredsson as an assistant coach.
Wow.
Your most hated rival. And you go and you take their their all-time franchise player who was an assistant coach and pretty much said, come on over here. This is where you want to be. And now we have the Senators in a bit of shambles over that move, which was a very, very. I just love how it got them all in a frenzy over that. Like John Chayka is not here to make friends. He does, and people thought, is he going to be able to do business? Because we heard that not many GMs like them. He's been able to do quite a bit, and he's been very active, which it's refreshing because the Leafs needed to do things differently. It was too much. Focusing too much on the star players, not putting enough of a supporting cast. And I think John Chayka has realized they needed to support the offensive players, the top end guys, not have so much of the burden be on them to do everything. Have guys in your middle, your bottom six that can play in those tougher situations. So it's not on your star players to do it. We were talking about goaltending. Dennis Hildeby, who was going to be a third goalie, potentially waiver candidate. He went and he traded him for Nick Paul. He added a pick to it, but it's like, I never would have expected that move. He's very much a different type of thinker, and I think that's exactly what this Leafs team needed.
We talked about... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Nope.
No, I was going to ask about, the goaltending. You talked about... in which you talk about the Maple Leafs trading away Joseph Woll to the Philadelphia Flyers, but one move really got my eyebrows raised, and I don't normally say that. It was Sergei Bobrovsky. The Maple Leafs going out to get Bobrovsky, free agent from the Florida Panthers, caught me by surprise, considering that one, he was coming off a lackluster year, with the Florida Panthers. You could attribute it to the workload over the last 3 previous seasons combined, during their dynastic run being a factor in it or not. But in his age 38 season, how do you see Bobrovsky shaping out as the guy in Toronto, considering that he's closer to 40 and his play has certainly declined?
Well, they brought in a new strength and conditioning coach, and the first thing he talked about was how Bobrovsky at 37, his physique is magnificent. This is a guy that has played a lot of hockey over the years and yet has been so durable. Now, were the numbers good last year? No. Were the Florida Panthers a good hockey team last year? Absolutely not.
Nope. They
were injured. That was a team that just had nothing left after going to three straight Stanley Cup finals. That was, they were done. And so I also like the fact that they got a Bobrovsky who wanted to stay in Florida, but Florida didn't really reciprocate that. So now he's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder. Did they pay a little bit of a premium to get him? The 3 years was a bit much. It's not, they didn't get him at a bargain price, but you weren't going to. The goaltending market was terrible. And I was kind of iffy on the move until I started to feel with him and Stolarz, it takes the pressure off of Anthony Stolarz because he's been having a hard time staying healthy because he's been asked to play more than he usually has had to over his career. So now that tandem was so good when they were in Florida because Bobrovsky could take the workload and Stolarz could come in and give you really good quality starts. He's not just a backup that you put on the second half of a back-to-back and you hope he gives you a chance. No, they'll use Stolars. Now I also think that maybe they kept Stolars because it was probably a little bit harder to find a trade market for him because his contract's not the greatest, considering his injury history. But I do think that the goaltending is in way better shape now. I like Joseph Woll a lot, but you couldn't depend on the guy. You couldn't. And that's something with goaltending. Your best ability is your availability.
All right, we're going to talk about the upcoming season. We haven't even mentioned that the Maple Leafs drafted the number 1 overall pick to join their team this year. We will talk about that next and more. Get into the Maple Leafs lineup here on Locked On NHL Game Night. All right, wrapping things up here with David Morassutti, one of the co-hosts of Locked On Toronto Maple Leafs. And David, for the people that are watching on YouTube, going to throw up the projected opening night lineup for the Toronto Maple Leafs and get your comments on that. Does it look about right? Are there things you would change? Are there players that are going to be competing for spots once training camp comes around? Projected top line of Matthews, McKenna, and Nyes. Second line of Tavares, Nylander, and Cowan. Third line of Sissons, Paul, and Roslovic. With Bluger, Joshua, and Duhaime on the fourth line. Your pairings are Raddysh and Riley, McCabe and Tanev, and Stetcher and Ekman Larson with a combo in net of Bobrovsky and Stolars. Does that look about right to you, or there's some players that would be in different positions or other names that need to be maybe included in there?
No, I think this is a pretty safe bet of what is probably going to happen next year. I don't know if really there's not really any younger players I could see the Leafs putting up that are gonna make a big impact on being everyday players. So like a lot of the guys they brought in, those are the guys that are gonna be there. The interesting one is Jack Roslovic, because they talk so much about him being really good buddies with Auston Matthews. And I wonder if they've sold him on the potential of playing with Matthews. I think though, when you've got a Gavin McKenna, we didn't even talk about, I know you brought it up. We didn't bring up Gavin McKenna.
Talk about him.
Like having the first overall pick and getting a guy like Gavin McKenna, who essentially becomes what you lost to Mitch Marner. You lost your best playmaker. You lost your guy who kind of, in a lot of ways, a lot of people in the organization said he's the straw that stirred the drink because he did a lot. Gavin McKenna brings this youthful energy, this injection of youth that this team has sorely needed. Easton Cowan, you saw it when he was in the lineup, how that youthful energy brought something different. But now you've taken that and you've elevated it with a Gavin McKenna, a guy of a higher pedigree. First overall pick. You know, I know he had his ups and downs in the NCAA, but once he got going, like that guy was unstoppable. You watched him at the World Juniors, he was just playing at a higher level. And I think he's going to go through his struggles. I think that's why Jack Roslovic is also here, because he's a very versatile player, can play in the center. He can kind of move up and down the lineup. But I think that lineup that you put is pretty much what I'm expecting. Maybe switching up the D pairs a little bit. I wonder if Riley and Raddysh, one of those guys will go with, like, maybe you have a Jake McCabe with a Darren Raddysh and a Riley and Chris Tanev pairing. They tried a Riley Tanev pairing. And they went away with it because Craig Berube kind of wanted that shutdown pairing. I wonder if Jim Hiller will do something a little differently, right? Maybe he's going to make Morgan Riley, his usage may be different under Jim Hiller, not having him play as much as he used to, because I do think there was a lot expected of Morgan Riley and he struggled with it. So yeah, I think the McKenna edition, some people, like, with all these changes that happened, like, that was the biggest gift the hockey gods could give the Leafs for that miserable season. Wasn't even the worst, right? Like the Vancouver Canucks, I'm sorry. They were ready to print those McKenna jerseys. And for the Leafs to get that pick was a kick to them, but the exact type of thing the Leafs needed, because I thought that pick was going to be gone. So that was found money to get a Gavin McKenna. And I think, you know, it's not going to be too long before you start hearing about the excitement that how excited of a player he is, and to have that player, you know, with Auston Matthews, learning under Auston Matthews, and not having the pressure that Connor Bedard had when he got to Chicago, even to an extent, Macklin Celebrini. Like, he's coming into a situation where guys are going to be competitive right off the hop. Guys are going to be expecting him to produce and be a contributor, but not being asked to do everything. Also, he was also training with Macklin Celebrini this offseason. Like, he is putting himself, he's putting everyone on notice in a way to say, I'm coming into this ready, right? Rookies tend to want to integrate themselves, but I think he's ready to really come in and be an impact player, and they're going to need him to be. Like, there's a lot of spotlight for a first overall pick in this city, but I do think that there's going to be a good support system around him. John Tavares, especially, he always likes to take young guys under his wing. It wouldn't surprise me maybe at some point in the season we see Gavin McKenna play with John Tavares, just to kind of get that familiarity and just try different things if things kind of aren't working. But I expect Auston Matthews is going to go to the coaching staff and say, yeah, that guy who can pass the puck really well, I want him putting that puck on my stick so I can try to get back to being a 50-plus goal scorer.
Speaking of John Tavares, because I really was amazed, but not shocked, amazed to see that he still highly productive in a season that it was very much a loss. But to see him score 31 goals and still have 71 points in 82 games was something that I marveled at, considering that, let's face it, John Tavares, he's getting older. He's really fighting off father time. And he's got like 3 more seasons left, including this one coming up, starting at the end of next month. So what is your expectations for John Tavares for this upcoming season as he continues to still be a very productive offensive player, and may I also add, be criminally underrated defensively as well?
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the few players that really thrived on the Craig Berube. We heard it all the time, and I don't blame people for talking about his age. He's not the fastest player, but he is so strong. He takes care of his body really well. And yeah, he's not the $11 million player he was when he came here, but he knew that. So he took less money because he really wants to win. His attitude is something that you don't see him complain. You don't see him try to cause any sort of issues. Like, he is really a pro's pro, and that's why I think he's worked so well here. And in a lot of ways, like, the criticism sometimes he would get, I'm just like the guy has done so much to try to really put this team in a position to win. And, I constantly hear, they got to find a way to get a better center, a better second line center than John Tavares. I'm sorry, you go on and you look and see how many centers you can find right now that are making what John Tavares is making, okay? Under $5 million a year and putting up the production as you talked about. Like, you're not finding that. So guess what? You got John Tavares. Be happy about it because he is that good of a hockey player still. And I do think that with Jim Hiller, somebody he is very familiar with, he should still be able to be a good player. And maybe the way that he's going to be deployed might suit him better because he can be a more offensive player. I think 30 goals definitely should be what to expect from him again because they're going to need guys to score, and he's a prime candidate to do it. Still one of the better face-off men too, and I think that's something of his game that gets very underlooked because it's all about possession. And, he's had his ups and downs with William Nylander, but they've really figured out ways to play with each other. And then it won't matter who the third guy is. They've had so many different players on that line, and they still find ways to be productive.
Auston Matthews is going into his second to last year of his contract. How important is this season for the future of Auston Matthews in Toronto?
Yeah, I think this is like the most critical year because he wants this. He probably wants to see this team be competitive to even consider sticking around. And I don't blame him because he got a taste of what winning is like with Team USA. And when you go through that and you see all these other players, have so much success, you have to debate, is it worth sticking around, or do I have to go and find a place that I can thrive and be put in those championship winning positions? Now, the Leafs also need Auston Matthews to be a good player in order for that to happen. So I think it's critical for both sides. I think there's no reason why the Leafs are in a good position to want to pay him what he wants to get paid. So I don't think money is going to be the issue. It's just, is he going to be willing to stick around in this situation? I think he will. I think he likes Toronto. I think people tend to look at the fact he's American and think that he won't want to stay in the Canadian market. I don't think that's true. I think he likes the Toronto. That's the market. That's the place you want to win. If Auston Matthews finds a way to win in Toronto, his career is set. Hall of Fame, definitely. Like, who doesn't want? Like, those are the things he wants. He's got all the individual success. This is the one thing he needs to get right now. And that's got to be his main goal, in my opinion. So I think him and the Leafs have to be aligned on that. Let that be the thing you worry about. There are going to be talks about his contract and about his future, but that's not even something he can entertain until next year anyways, because he has 2 years left. So I think this year just has to be focused on getting back to being the player he needs to be, and the Leafs getting back to being in a competitive situation.
David, let's get you out of here on this. 2 years ago, division champs. Last year, last in the division. What do you think it happens this coming season with the Leafs?
I think they should be back in a playoff position. I don't think they're a division-winning roster as it currently sits, but I think they can get back to being in that third Atlantic spot, potentially the wild card. It's going to be they're not the top three heavyweights like they were for all these years, but I do think that there's a lot of things going for them to get them back into that playoff position.
All right. If you want complete coverage of Toronto Maple Leafs, you need to download and you need to watch the Locked On Toronto Maple Leafs podcast and YouTube show featuring David Morassutti. David, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate the fun talk, and we'll talk to you again this coming season.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, David.
All right. And that will conclude this episode as we are previewing all 32 teams in the NHL for this upcoming season. And don't forget, once the season gets going, we will be here for you each and every night, wrapping up the night in the NHL during the regular season and the playoffs here on Locked On NHL Game Night. For Shukri Wrights, I'm Eddie Garcia. Thanks for watching this episode of Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.